Welcome everyone to our first diversity and inclusion training. This is the first training in a three-part series on how to facilitate a welcoming volunteer team. My name is Geordie Barry and I work in digital for NVDAMS, and today I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Alex and Jake. Alex, Jake, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Songer. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm the Special Projects Manager for the NVDIMS.
Hi everyone, I'm Jake Feynman. I'm one of the regional organizing directors for the NVDEMS. I run our Northern Nevada field office.
Great, thanks Alex and Jake for joining us today. Our goal as an organization is to continue to build a party that is inclusive, empowering, and consistently evolving based upon our values. We should always fight for communities that have historically been left out of the political process. So to facilitate this, we're doing a three-part series on diversity and inclusion. So in this training, we will kick off our series with setting norms and challenging assumptions. Our second training will discuss Nevada demographics and intersectionality and use that knowledge to create inclusive volunteer teams. Finally, we'll end our series with a training on how to be an ally. And if you have any questions throughout the course of this training series, please reach out to your field organizer or email training@nvdems.com. So with that being said, our agenda for today is to define what a norm is, good leadership practices that are centered around our norms, and finally, how we can hold ourselves accountable to upholding these norms. So what is a norm? It's having a positive team culture that creates an environment where everyone feels included, valued, and respected. And a great way to facilitate this is through creating norms that hold everyone accountable to an agreed standard of behavior. Norms are the very first step to live your values as a campaign, and will send a message both internally and externally as others come into contact with your team. The Democratic Party as a whole represents marginalized communities and the voices of people who have not always been heard and included in the political process and political discussions. So that's why it's critical that people of all different backgrounds have a seat at the table and are included in these conversations. So that means creating norms that are respectful and consistent throughout our entire organization. We all walk through the world differently based upon our identities, so it's important to be mindful of how our actions and our words can be interpreted by others, even if we don't have malicious intent. Norms should always account for the safety and inclusion of marginalized groups, including people of color, women, the LGBTQ plus community, folks that are differently abled, working class folks, and people of all religions. So let's go over some common examples of norms. It includes allowing everyone the choice to speak during group conversations, encouraging all ideas and opinions to be shared with respect and genuine curiosity, holding events in spaces that are accessible to those with limited mobility, when in person, expecting screens to be down when full presence is required, giving everyone our undivided attention, a commitment to being solutions-oriented, having a spirit of yes, a willingness to help, a positive attitude and approach, being kind to yourself when you're learning new things, and reaching out when you need additional support and help. And finally, and one of the most important norms, should be that there's a role for everyone that wants to be involved on your volunteer team. So with that being said, now that we know what a norm is, let's go over some good leadership practices that will help facilitate these norms.
So happy to see everyone here today. We're going to talk through some good leadership practices, especially around norm setting. The norms that you are going to establish with your team are really one of the best ways that you're going to engage in equity-focused practices. The practices I'm going to talk through are really not an exhaustive list because everyone has their own style of leadership, and you should take that into account and feel empowered to kind of have your own structures. But really setting norms should serve as like a starting point on your own end with which like you and your team should work around and set their own norms and inclusive practices. I think a really good starting point with this, it's something we do here a lot, every time there's a new phase, we sit down and we create a list of norms with our team, and that's something you should do with yours. You should always start with whatever your baseline expectations are and make sure that you're explaining them to each team member so that they understand what's being asked of them and what those expectations really mean. You should always allow for a space where people can also set their own norms. This usually, for us, looks like just really a sit-down conversation where we're walking through what our executive director and our caucus or general director want to do and what their norms are, and then they allow us to provide feedback and add our own norms. And I think a really good practice to setting those expectations is to start with writing a mission statement. And that should be something that you do with your team together. And during that time, you should include a section where you just talk through, like, here's how we're going to treat each other in these spaces. Here's what our norms are. Here's what the expectations are for this team. Here's what is and is not acceptable and how we're going to treat each other and how this process is going to work. Another good practice that we have is just being accessible. So, like, including your pronouns and email signatures. Like, there's so many professional interactions that take place online, especially right now. It can be challenging to know who's on the other end of a digital communication, but by making it a standard practice to include your pronouns in your email signatures, you can take guesswork out of how you address people and how they address you. Even if you have a name that might seem like it's aligned with a gender identity, modeling this practice can make your team a much more welcoming and safe space for every person, not just on your team, but who is looking to join it. Another good practice that we have here is we use language that avoids assumptions. So our party is here to bring people into the fold, not shy them away from, like, practicing or participating in politics. So everyone works in their own fashion, and it's our job as teammates and as leaders to create inclusive environments so that everyone can grow and flourish. And I think one important part of this is just approaching conversations intentionally and listening to what people are saying while you're having conversations with them, while you're bringing them into the fold, while you're becoming a part of your team. And this kind of leads into another point, which is just knowing your team. You have one-on-ones with your organizer. You should have one-on-ones with your teammates. So just be aware of and make sure that you're creating inclusive spaces for all communities. And you should feel empowered to build inclusive spaces on your team so that members of any identity group can convene within those spaces. That is a genuine practice, and that is why listening is so important. And I also want to say, like, please be mindful. No one likes being pigeonholed or tokenized. That's why you should always make sure to include any non-dominant voices, any individual communities, respect intellectual contributions by providing opportunities to contribute beyond representing their own identity groups. And then I have two last points. When creating norms, regardless of whatever your team's explicit norms are, and also when interacting with your teammates, it's really important to be thoughtful of the different ways that your words and actions might impact or be interpreted by each person on your team or that you interact with. I think in particular, it's important that we are aware not all identities are outwardly visible. And that's why having conversations and and assuming best intentions, but being open with things like this is really important. The final point I will touch on before passing it to Jake is that it's really important to create inclusive and welcoming teams, and you should try to be as proactive as possible about reflecting and incorporating good practices at all times. I think as you work through the next 2 parts of this series, please try to think about or just consider a part of your identity that's really important to you and that helps you understand yourself. And try and empathize with having a significant part of your personhood misrepresented or even absent-mindedly ignored, even when people are well-intentioned. And how did you approach conversations with people? How did those play out? And how do you plan on approaching those conversations as well? And your organizers, NBDEMs, are always here if you have any questions about how to work through something like that. We're here to help. But it's important that you're building an inclusive team and that you're being kind to yourself while doing so. And with that, I will pass it to Jake.
All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable for upholding these norms. We want to make sure that we are, building a space that where everyone can give feedback and where everyone's voice is heard. One of the best ways to do that is institute different systems and structures to make sure that you can track your team's culture. You can identify problems that need to be fixed as well. So one of the reasons we want to institute things like this is because we want to make sure that we provide space where people are comfortable giving feedback. Sometimes it's uncomfortable for people to build that on their own, take that extra step to reach out to someone. So that's why we need to create systems like this so that the feedback is easier and we can make sure that we're getting everything, we're hearing everything that we need to hear in order to create a positive and inclusive culture. It's really important for us to do that so that you, the person running this team, can understand, problem solve, and address issues that people are feeling after a training or an event or anything else like that. So one of the best ways to do this is just for you yourself to talk through how every event went afterward, or once a week or something, and that's something that you can do with your field organizer or your volunteer organizer. Just talk over any feedback that you've received and anything that you're sort of feeling positive or negative about as well. We want to make sure that we're letting people speak during group conversations. So if you are doing a group strategy meeting or a group training or something like that, we want to make sure that every single voice that's present is being heard. So make sure that you, as the person facilitating these conversations, are making space for everyone to, say their piece or come up with ideas they have or something like that. It's also a good idea to send out surveys, maybe after an event or maybe once a week. That's a really good, standard normal step that you can do that provides a written space for someone to let you know about a concern that they might have. And it's always important when we do identify these issues to talk about what good follow-up looks like and also a timeline for that follow-up. It's all well and good to identify issues, but if we don't set good action steps that can be followed in order to achieve the fixes that we need to do, it wasn't that useful to identify them, right? So we want to make sure that we can set those good actionable steps once we've identified a problem. And just the point of all of this, and if you have other ideas, that's great. But the point of all of this is to make sure that we are just doing what we can to make sure that there are opportunities for feedback and make sure every voice is heard. So when we talk about holding ourselves accountable for being inclusive, a lot of the time this is going to look like having conversations with someone who maybe said or did something that made another member of our team uncomfortable. And these conversations can be difficult, but they're about seriously examining the ways in which our daily choices impact others, and also challenging ourselves to build a culture in which people we know and love don't have to worry as much about the things that many of us take for granted. So to maintain this positive team culture, we sometimes need to call our teammates in when they don't abide by our norms. And that's particularly important when they break norms that support inclusivity. So when we use the phrase calling in, we want to differentiate that against calling out. So when we talk about calling out, this is the thing that can make a lot of people feel uncomfortable because the aim here is to publicly shame the offending party. Whereas when we talk about calling in, we want to make sure that while issues are addressed and identified, our goal here is to educate people and to make sure that this isn't a problem moving forward. So a lot of the time, most of the time, this is going to look like speaking one-on-one with someone to support their development and create a better harmony within the space. As with any professional interaction, it's always a good rule to praise publicly and then to redirect or challenge in private to make sure that we are framing these conversations in a way that makes them successful and moves us forward to a more inclusive and better space. So a few ways that you might call in a teammate. If you personally feel harmed by a word or action and you feel comfortable speaking with the person one-on-one, then you can set up that meeting with them and explain to them that you experienced harm and ask them to listen and reflect on the matter before trying to defend or explain themselves. If you witness what appears to be harm to another person, then first of all, you can ask that person that you perceive to be harmed if they would like support or intervention. If it wouldn't make them feel comfortable for you to stand up on their behalf, you shouldn't do that either. And you can always talk to your volunteer organizer, your NVDEMS field organizer as well, if you want like a second opinion on gauging if you should act on something. If a teammate approaches you saying that they were offended by something that happened with another teammate, then you should listen to them and ask how they would like you to support them. And of course, your NVDEMS field organizer will always be here as a resource to help you plan and navigate challenging conversations. Your field organizer should also be checking in with you regularly to help you maintain a positive culture in your volunteer team. So you should please feel comfortable approaching them regarding any issues that have occurred. And it's also important for you specifically to be open to being held accountable as well. It's all well and good to establish these norms. We also want to make sure that we're reflecting inwardly on ourselves and making sure that we're also producing an inclusive atmosphere on our own, not just enforcing that on other people. So when you do something outside of the norms set by and for everyone, it's important to hold yourself accountable. No one's perfect, so it's important to be critically reflecting on your own thoughts and behaviors and feelings, because that's an essential part of authentic leadership. And remember, norms are co-created, so if you are disconnected from them, then their value diminishes not just for you, but also for those around you. It's much harder to enforce a norm and to make sure that others are respecting it if you're not visibly respecting it yourself. All right, I'm going to kick it back to Jordy.
Thank you so much, Alex and Jake, for joining us on this training, and thank you to all of you for joining in on our discussion. If you have any questions about the content of this training, please feel free to reach out to your field organizer, or you can contact our training department at training@nvdems.com. I also encourage you to visit nvdems.com/training-nevada, where you'll find more trainings as well as the next part in our diversity and inclusion series. Thank you so much.